Nazi research methods are still having an impact on current research. Welcome to Scientific Station. I'm Brendanovich.
And I'm Dan Goldstein.
So, in 1933, an anatomist at the University of Vienna, Eduard Pernkopf, began work on an anatomical study that lasted about 20 years. And in the 50s, he published the Topographical Anatomy of Man, which since then has become a seminal work in anatomy, and it has many illustrations. In the late 80s and through the mid-1990s, aspects of his work were uncovered showing that 1,300 bodies that the University of Vienna received came from the Nazi death camps. These are people who had been executed. And it can't be excluded that the illustrations in this work on anatomy might have derived from some of those bodies, any of those bodies. Scientists are left with this quandary, what to do with that work. Clearly, it wasn't done with current ethical standards, but using that work now and going forward, if scientists use that work, are they affirming those research practices?
Well, I think the question I have is, why do we do science?
To understand the physical world?
Well, we can see what's inside a mountain by blowing it up. Is that good science?
You discover something.
Yeah, but you end up with a flattened mountain. Or you can see what's inside people by killing them. Is that good science?
And looking at dead bodies, what kind of idea does that give you of the anatomy?
Well, I think for me, it's very important to remember that when I do science for the society I live in, for the people around me, to learn things, but it's ultimately for my community, which informs why I do it and puts the limits on it. And as a scientific profession, there's a lot of limits that have been put on scientists for human subject research, which in 1933 weren't there, but today you have to fill out a lot of paperwork, you have to describe what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it's going to affect people. If there's a possibility of a negative effect, people have to understand that. There has to be informed consent. And the reason for that is, for me, do science for our community. Now in this case, they definitely weren't doing science for their community. And I think it's a slippery slope to start using research unless you can show that there's an overarching need for that research for our current community. Then scientists have to understand that the results of bad science done not for their community isn't going to be accepted.
Now, one way that scientists become revered and certain research becomes revered is how often it's cited by later scientists. Should scientists even cite this work or cite it with a caveat? Or is the caveat still necessary?
Caveats most necessary. We're all a little addicted to citing work that is the seminal work, but nobody's ever read it. That's a big problem in science. I'm not sure how relevant something done in anatomy in 1933 is. I'm not an expert in it, but I do know a little bit about volumetric computer graphics, and there's been more recent projects of taking human bodies of subjects with consent before their death, where slices have been taken, where a human body has been frozen, and onion sheet thin slices are taken from the body, starting at the head, kind of icky, but all the way down, and those slices can then be photographed and reconstructed into a stack of photographs, and then that stack of photographs can be made into what's called a volumetric rendering. And it's the kind of picture you've seen where you see a body and then you can see slices in any direction once it comes up. So I question the relevancy of something from 1933, and I understand the need to reference previous work, but at some point it's more about ego than actually having read the previous work. Now, if someone's really read the work from 1933 and they feel that it is absolutely relevant to what they're doing, and they've actually read it, not everyone has, then they can cite it. But there better be a caveat, and they better make sure that any results or benefits from that work and any benefits from the original work should clearly go to the community that was not served by the original work but instead was abused. And to this day, there are Jewish groups and there are Holocaust survivor groups that, you know, could use that money. And scientists have to understand those limits then just as now.
And looking at this work and how it's considered in the ethical considerations, if we look now at debates in science, in the public especially, about science and what science should be done and shouldn't be done, a lot of it comes to political fighting about what should get funded and what shouldn't get funded and where restrictions should be placed. It seems that what happened in the past informs what decisions people are making now.
Well, we should never forget history. It's been said more eloquently than that. And even in science, we have to be careful that we're not just blindly citing work and that we're going forward with our current standards and our current work, and that we're never forgetting, again, the reason why we do science. We do science to better our community, to better our world, not just to see how things work.
Hopefully talking about this and making it known wider about this work, as widely as it's been discussed in some areas of science, hopefully that conversation will improve these efforts.
Hopefully it'll better inform current scientists and remind them that we do science to better our communities and to better our world. And although sometimes it's fun to blow things up and see what happens, we grow out of that. And even as a scientist, you have to grow out of that.
So let us know what you think. Go to scientificstation.com.
Thank you.